Okay, alors welcome to the new episode of a Thought Experiment.
Welcome to episode 18 of A Thought Experiment. This week's cover art is brought to you by a photographer named Fred Kramer. Fred Kramer was a Czechoslovakian photographer, and I only found out about him because I spent the last few days in Prague. My mom was out here visiting, and we got to take a train, hang out in Prague for a couple days, and the first thing we did was go to an art museum. At this art museum, Fred Kramer was being highlighted. He had an exhibit being shown. And I learned that he was born November 27th in 1913 in Czechoslovakia. And in 1934, he graduated from the State School of Graphic Arts in Prague. Now, the amazing thing about Fred Kramer is that he survived 2 different internment camps during World War II. And in late April of 1945, he was liberated from those internment camps. Now, before he went into those internment camps, he was a social documentary photographer. Coming out of the internment camps post-war, he switched to commercial and studio photography. He was among the leading Czech photographers from 1950 to about 1980, known for the early adoption of color photography, as well as his collaboration with graphic artists. Now, I'll share 2 of my favorite photos. One of them is the cover art, but I'll share its original image, both on Instagram and YouTube. And what I really loved about his work, and as you can tell from both the images that I'll put on here and that I'll upload to Instagram, is the angles at which he shoots, you'll notice, are even the angle of today's cover. He shoots the reflection of the woman, but it's at her like eye level, as if the camera is sitting on the table. And I really love that, opposed to if he shot, if she was looking at her reflection, he shot overhead, because you'd only see the reflection. In this angle, you get to see both her actual face and the reflection, which show almost 2 different facial expressions, which is super interesting. And then the other thing I really loved about his photography was the spacing of items that he used. You can see the lip gloss, or in the other image that I'll upload there's a set of bricks, and the way he spaces them out looks very lazy is not the word, but it's very just kind of thrown out there. But the more you look at it, the more it makes so much sense, the way that each item is positioned in the image. And that's kind of some of the beauty that I found within his photography. The actual museum itself was rather incredible. I mean, the building that it was in itself was a piece of art. And then you put art within that piece of art, and it becomes a beautiful, beautiful environment. I've come to love the people of Eastern European countries. They're extremely honest and direct. Even in high tourism areas, they hold their own values, which I very much appreciate. They've had to fight for their independence as a country. And I think that just comes to show through the people. And I really enjoy that direct, honest, strong presence that they hold on to. And along with that, the food that I got to eat in Prague was fantastic. We went to a butcher shop, actually, that had Wagyu cheeseburgers. And the way they cook meat in Prague is extremely rare, which I like. But what it would be considered in America, it would be considered not cooked. I would imagine a lot of people would send it back, but I don't know if it has to do with the meat quality or standards being higher, that they're able to, cook the meat for so little time. But regardless, it was incredible. We went to a place that had homemade pasta, as well as a steakhouse that was just superb. Was absolutely fantastic. And one of my biggest takeaways from the trip, and it really came to me towards the end there, was we got to go to a symphony at a church. And I call it a symphony. It was just, two violinists and an organ player. And it was a smaller gathering, maybe 50 people, if that, in this church. And you're looking around these European churches everywhere I go, and the imagery that is along the walls and the top of the churches is incredible. And many of the churches are filled with tourists, such as myself, who kind of just go around and look. Now, when we got to go to this church and listen to music be played, it was as if as soon as they started playing music in this church, all of the imagery, the paintings, the designs that were, all around the edges of this place, I say that they made more sense. It was like they almost came alive in a way. The church, you can see what an acoustic environment it was set up to be. And we got to listen to this beautiful music for an hour of just classical music, and it takes you to another space. It really throws you back, and you're, looking at these beautiful, beautiful paintings along the walls, the ceiling, everywhere, and it really brings everything to life. And the more I go around these European cities, the more that you see the importance of the church. And for me, at first, when I started traveling around, Europe, it was like, oh, these churches are really cool to look at. But I didn't really feel their significance. And maybe it was the music being played, but now as I go around and I go inside these churches, it hit me that like they spent all this time, effort, energy, resources, so many hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, building these churches, and the importance that they saw in religion being a fundamental truth of existence. And so it takes it to a deeper level in terms of going and seeing these churches and not just thinking of them as like art, but they're sanctuaries in a sense. Like people, they spent all of their resources building these churches. And I think for me, it feels good to pay a greater respect and acknowledge the importance of religion that is still prevalent in life today. It can be seen as one of the fundamental truths of our existence. And I've only come to realize that through traveling through these churches. And the more I read different philosophers, psychiatrists, and their writings, the more they come back to religion being a fundamental truth of existence. And it just makes so much sense when you look at these churches and the time they took to build them all. And they wouldn't do that for something that they didn't believe was the absolute meaning of like life. It was the center point, the gathering point. We went to a castle in Prague, and the church was absolutely incredible. And the amount of, sculptures, paintings, symbols that are in there. It's truly a place where it is meant to bring everyone together under this house closer to the eternal truth. And it only came to me as I've traveled more and more around Europe and see these churches, because you don't see churches like that in America. Actually, the churches in America are very commercial in a sense. At least the ones that I've seen. And I didn't grow up going to church, nor did I go to private schools. So I was never exposed to that, especially being from the Northwest. There's not a huge church influence or influence of religion for that matter. And that's been, no pun intended, a blessing, because I've been able to come to religion in my own speed and time. And I feel like I'm on the very outside edges of it, looking into what could be. But I really had that realization as I was in this church listening to the music being played, like, oh, this is what it was all about. This is what it's really all ever been about. And we've continued to just make complexities in society that at times bring us farther away from what can be seen as the fundamental truth of religion. And it's not so much falling under a certain doctrine, whether that's, Christian, Catholic, Hinduism, Buddhism, any of those things. It's more so the truths that remain at the base level of all of those religions that are true across the board. And I think in acknowledging those fundamental truths, that is what makes me feel more connected to everyone. Everything that doesn't make sense almost really starts to make sense when you put it into the religious context. And it's something that, as I continue to read from different philosophers and psychiatrists and talk to friends of my own who have similar interests, the deepening my understanding, the deeper my understanding will go. But again, it's only through those exploration of different places that I've been able to move at my own speed. And I think moving at your own speed is really what's going to bring us into the word for this week. The word for this week is cadence. It is a noun, and it can be defined as the beat, time, or measure of motion or activity. An alternative definition: the general inflection or rhythmic pattern of movement, especially in speech or step. So I love the word step at the end there, because you can begin to imagine maybe you're walking on a gravel road. You're walking on a gravel road and it's quiet. You're in nature. So it's very serene, very calm. And you're walking at just a normal pace. And so, each step creates a sound from the gravel. 1, 2, 1, 2. And you could imagine that as you start to step faster, increasing your cadence, now you're creating a different rhythm. Or if you walked slower, the sound, the vibration that would be given is going to be different. You're creating a different cadence. I can do the same thing when I talk. I can speed up when I talk, or I could really slow down. Now, the origin of cadence comes from a Latin word, I believe it's pronounced cadentia, which means a falling. Now, as I explored the word cadence for myself, I started to begin to think that the cadence of steps that create a rhythm allow us to enter into a flow state. When we move at a pace that is organic to us or to an environment, we begin to enter a flow state. Now, there's a cadence that occurs when we take on any task or endeavor. And at the beginning, when we're learning, it's much slower. The cadence is slower because we're using a lot of brain energy to try and figure out, the little nuances that are occurring. And as we continue this cadence, and we continue this practice and we increase our technical skills, we start to move from what is in the mind and move it to the body. Now this is where that brain-body coordination comes into play, and the cadence is able to enter into more of a flow because we're getting outside of what is been in the brain. You think about an example would be like cooking a recipe. The first time that you cook the recipe, it's going to take you longer because you're going to have to read and then act upon the step, and then read and act upon the step. And eventually, after you've practiced this recipe multiple times, it sinks into your brain and you're able to do it at a faster cadence. It becomes a dance, a flow, it's one continual movement that you make in the kitchen. I use that example of a kitchen because I love to cook, and there's nothing better than the timing of everything being just so in line with when you turn on the stove to when you place one item into the pan versus another, because you know how long each is going to take in order to come out with a dish that has all the ingredients ready at the optimal time. And we can understand flow as being like a true freedom of movement. Well, in order to have that freedom of movement, we have to see which cadence aligns with us and our environment organically. Sometimes that's a slower cadence. Sometimes it's a little faster. But I thought it was interesting that it came from the word cadentia, which is Latin meaning of falling. Because, you allow yourself to fall into a flow state. And the idea of falling would mean that you kind of release friction in a way. I guess friction would be the word there. You release all of these things that you're trying to force. Because when you allow yourself to fall, you're moving, you're falling with gravity, which is a natural force. So we fall into a flow state. We fall into a flow state by falling into the most organic cadence. And one thing I talked about last week on the show was how nature is so important for aligning ourselves. And when we're in nature, that's the most organic cadence that there is, the most organic sounds, the most organic steps, the most organic motion. And it really actually hit me going back to Prague was we're in this city, and after a couple of days, you're like, okay, I've seen what I need to see. I have a park that goes across from my window, and I never get tired of looking at the trees in the park. But why? And it's like, nature is constantly moving. Whether we see it or not, it's alive. It's moving. It's growing. Buildings, they're not moving. I mean, the gusts of wind could be 100 miles an hour. Those buildings aren't going to go anywhere. It's stationary. Well, as humans, we're built to move. We're built for forward progression, which is what nature is. So when we move into nature and we align ourselves with the rhythm and the movement of nature, and then we take that back into our workplace or our personal lives, we start to move at a pace that is ultimately the most organic thing possible and allows us to fall into that flow. I mean, think about a waterfall. Waterfall, if you watch when I go to waterfalls, sometimes I'll just try to follow a single drop, and I can't do it, obviously, but I'll try to follow a single drop from the top all the way to the bottom, and you just see it free fall all the way, one after another. And that's kind of how we fall into the flow of whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's cooking, walking, typing, writing, drawing, performing a sport, practicing, whatever it may be, we allow ourselves to just fall into that sport, into that flow. And the only way that we fall into it is by releasing the friction that we hold on to in order to try to manipulate what we want. You're going to get what is meant for you. Whether you think you want it or not, it is meant for you. Anything that comes to you is meant for you. It's happening for you, not to you. And the more I come back to those ideas and thoughts, the more it comes back to religion too. Because I mean, you look at some of the scriptures in the Bible, like you're gonna get what is meant for you. And additionally, it also comes under the idea that we're all, you could be a tree in a forest, and you think you're the only tree in this forest. And then upon finding, certain religious texts or coming to religion, any religion, you start to realize it's almost as if you open your eyes and the whole forest is filled with trees, other people. It really creates the connection. It makes you feel a part of the whole. And it is in the word cadence that I think I came to some of these religious ideas, or religious facts rather, at my own cadence, which has allowed me to come to a place of understanding and acceptance. And it's been something that has given me, life force, energy to continue to move forward at my own cadence, because you're going to get what is entirely meant for you all the time, every time. There's no way that it would ever happen to you and not be meant for you. And if it was meant for you, it means it's meant for you to grow from, to learn from, to experience. So when we are able to look at it from that lens that, I don't necessarily enjoy what's happening right now, but it's meant for me. Okay, so how can I spin it into what is this? What am I meant to learn from this? Any experience. The more you do that, the more you become rooted, the more you learn about yourself, which is something I've been really diving into. Is that, I got a chance, I mentioned his name a couple times on this podcast, but Harvey Martin, I asked him a question the other day. I texted Harvey and I said, hey, if you could give advice to 27-year-old you, what would it be? And he basically came back with the answer of that it always comes to understanding yourself and asking yourself questions of who am I and what are my fundamental truths? And when you're rooted in religion or certain fundamental truths, they withstand, any amount of time. And so thank you, Harvey, for being someone that I can ask those questions to, and I really trust his answers. I think everyone needs, certain people in your life that you can go to with any type of question and trust the answer. You have to have that. You absolutely have to have that. But that is the entirety of the thought experiment on cadence and how it really relates to any endeavor that you take on in life. It's at an organic pace. When we move at a pace that is too fast, life will show us. Or we move at a pace that is too slow, life will show us. And we consistently make adjustments. We allow ourselves to be fluid in the situation. And we find a cadence that moves and allows us to fall into the flow. The end of the regular season has occurred. We finished the season 25-5 and head into the playoffs with the number one, maybe overall seed, at least the number one seed in the South Division. Now this means that we'll take on Hamburg in the first round of the playoffs in 2 weeks. We have 2 weeks off, which is quite a break between the playoffs, but that's okay. And it'll be a 5-game set. Now, in the weekend that just occurred, on Saturday we played a doubleheader because we got rained out the night before. And the first game we faced a pitcher who I believe is on one of the German national teams, maybe the under-23 or the older one. Either way, he's thrown against us all year, and he's a good pitcher. He's like maybe upper 80s, but he throws a lot of strikes with his fastball. And aside from the first time I faced him, I think he's had quite a bit of success off of me. And this last weekend, first at bat I faced him. I was in an 0-2 count and I flew out to left field. And as I'm watching him from the side, because we don't have any of the resources, obviously, that we had in affiliate baseball. Release height, extension, vertical break, horizontal break, his spin numbers, or spin rate, I should say. Any of those things. So you're just kind of eyeballing everything. Now, as I'm watching him from the side, I see, okay, he's got a lower slot, so the ball is coming out at a lower height in relation to the ground than a normal pitcher. Okay, but every time he gets me out, I'm under the ball. Okay, this tells me that the ball's got a little bit of carry, which we call as vertical break. So the perception of the ball when you combine a low release height with carry is that the ball is almost moving upwards, shooting upwards, which is why you get a lot of swings underneath or fly balls. Okay, so I watched him a couple more. There's a lot of fastballs too, which is actually common with guys who have quite a bit of carry because they get a lot of swing and miss. So you can throw your fastball quite a bit. And so I'm watching from the side and I tell myself, all right, so how can I make an adjustment to give myself the best chance next time up? I was like, okay, well, we know that, if a pitcher has low release height with vertical break, I need to think about getting flatter with my swing. It's different thoughts for everybody. For me, it made sense in my head. Okay, I need to get flatter with my swing. I need to be flatter so I can be behind the ball because this ball is shooting up and it's going to be extremely, extremely straighter than what the mind can perceive with a regular fastball. This is why vertical break induces a lot of swing and miss, which is why you watch, Major League game, a lot of guys with vertical break. Take Brian Wu, for example, with the Mariners. He's going to throw up in the zone quite a bit and get a lot of swing and miss. Okay, well, we're not talking about Brian Wu. We're talking about German baseball. So, let's bring it back. But the fundamentals are the same. Okay, so I need to take a flatter swing and I need to see the ball lower because my perception is going to be off. So I need to see the ball lower, maybe beneath the knees a little bit. Okay, all right, so now I have this plan. All right, so now I'm on deck. I'm kind of practicing a swing, that flatter feel that I want. I go up and hit. First pitch is a strike. Next pitch is a ball, and it's at the top of the zone. Call the ball. 50-50 ball or strike, whatever. Call the ball. Okay. The taking of that pitch told me, all right, my eyes are set in the right place, because otherwise I would have swung at that pitch. Because out of the hand, it'll look like it maybe is down the middle, and then it'll come up. Okay, so I'm in the right place. All right, so now we just trust the plan. Okay, well, the third pitch of the at-bat, he throws a fastball, home run. Move to the next at-bat. Okay, well, I know that plan of what I was looking for, the way I set myself up was optimal because it achieved a result of a home run. Okay, so the next at-bat, I need to stay flat. I need to continue to look for the ball down because, again, if he throws a secondary, which is his changeup, I can go get the ball down. I also like hitting the ball down naturally. So this works, now I'm able to plan correctly. Okay, first pitch of the at-bat is a fastball. I believe I fouled it off. I think we're 0-1. Next pitch, change up. Okay, so I see it down. I just trust the swing, double down the right field line. Okay, well, so the last 2 times I faced him, homer, double. The point that I'm moving into is the realization that I had after this took place. And it was first the acknowledgement that being a hitter in baseball is the hardest endeavor in sports to enter a flow state. Aside from maybe, a soccer goalie if you're not getting that many shots on goal because of the lack of opportunity. Let's stick with baseball though. The challenge comes, especially in baseball, is the intertwinement as well as the separation of you have the emotion and the body on one side, and then you have the intellect and the mind on the other side. Now we take, for example, a hitter, right? We take, for example, the story that I just gave. Okay, I had to plan and strategize using my intellect and mind. Okay, now I plan and strategize so that I can turn it off when I go hit, and I live inside of emotion and the body. Okay, now regardless of the result that happens, when that's over, I'm going to have to move into intellect and mind in order to plan and strategize again for the next at bat. Now the difficulty in baseball becomes in the duration of time that occurs between at bats. And the difficulty that arises in sports in general is how do we find that balance point of intertwinement and separation between the emotion and the body, the intellect and the mind. It's mind and body. If you can imagine with me that you are a circle, a whole circle. All right, now we draw a line through the middle of that circle. Drew it on a page and we draw a line through the middle. On the left side, we have emotion and body. On the right side, we have intellect and mind. Okay, well, when we were partaking in a sport, call it baseball, the understanding comes that balance in this instance does not mean 50-50. When you're up there hitting, it's 95% emotion body, maybe 5% intellect mind. And that's just recognizing each pitch that was you're following the sequence. Same for a pitcher, right? When you're on the mound, we just want the emotion and the body. There's no intellect. Ideally you're trusting your catcher and the mind is just out. And that could be balance in that instance. It is not 50-50. Now, the skill comes in having the autonomy to move back and forth, okay, between emotion, body, intellect, mind. For instance, we can take a pitcher, for example. Okay, a pitcher, they plan, they strategize, intellect, mind. Okay, now they go out and they pitch the first inning in the body, in emotion. All right, now they're pitching with this emotion because it's a source of fuel. Say they come off the mound. Okay, now we give ourselves a little bit of time in the dugout. And then we have to be able to move into intellect mind in order to plan. Most commonly, they're going to plan for the first hitter they're going to face that next inning. Or if they're facing the bottom of the order, maybe the leadoff or a hitter that poses more of a threat is up second or third. Regardless, we have to move into that planning stage. Okay, now maybe with 2 outs in the inning, we have to switch back to emotion, body, and go out and perform. And it's that back and forth that occurs. Same thing with a hitter. Now, What's so much more difficult about being a hitter than a pitcher? A pitcher manipulates the pace of the game, especially with the shot clock now too. Hitters are sped up more now than ever. For a hitter, you have that intellect and mind. You plan before the at bat. Now you go out and say that bat doesn't go how you want it to. You had a plan, it didn't work, you got out, whatever. Okay, how are we going to process that, and how do we move to the other side? Okay, well, you might not have time in the dugout because the game moves relatively quickly. Say you're the third out of the inning. Anyone that has ever played baseball knows that the time in between pitches, or while you're out there, even fielding, ground balls in between innings, throwing around, you're gonna process those emotions. Okay, so you process the emotions. Now you move into slowly intellect and mind. You start going over, okay, what happened in the at-bat? What was my plan? Okay. And the reason this is so important is because you cannot field and play defense out of a defense. Really, in any sport is very intellectual. You have to be thinking of all these possible scenarios that could occur. Fielding a ground ball while you're emotional it's not going to go well. I'll tell you that from experience. I'll tell you that it doesn't go well. And I'll tell you that when you're in that intellectual, that cerebral state, fielding becomes much easier because you're aware of each possible scenario that could happen. When we're fielding in an emotional, bodily state, it's not even that an error could occur. It's that our actions might not be as precise. And it's very paradoxical to hitting, because you might say like, oh, well, wouldn't you want to be in the body when you field? No, like defense in baseball is so unique in the sense that we just cannot be emotional while we're out there. It's an emotion. I don't mean the peaks and the valleys. I mean living in the body. Defense, you have to be very aware and intellectual of what is happening, because someone's got to think for the pitcher. The pitcher's not thinking out there. He's just in the body. So, you're communicating with who's got the bag on a runner. What happens if he bunts? Okay, the ball gets hit into the right center field gap. What am I going to do? Where are we lining up? All of these things. If you're just purely in that emotional state, those thoughts don't happen, and then the game speeds up. So there's a time for each of it. So you start to move through that intellectual and that mindful state while you're on defense. In between pitches, you start to think about, okay, well, he threw that and he tunneled it with this cutter. Okay. So now you start to maybe formulate what could be a plan for the next time up. And that also is the beauty of baseball, is you have time. You can come into the dugout and then you move into that state. And now we're able to formulate a plan, and we're able to fully be in our body or emotional when we move into the next at bat. Now, the most common occurrence with amateur players or players who get very sped up by the game is the inability to move between these two functions or states autonomously. They are a victim to the speed of the game. Okay, let's use, for instance, the pitcher. Pitcher comes off the mound, gives up a run. All right, he's been in that emotional, that bodily state. He comes into the dugout. He's unable to get outside of his own emotions. Okay, because of that, he's unable to look at the intellect, the mind, what he needs to plan or what he did from an objective point of view. He's emotionally attached to it. Because he's emotionally attached to it, he's not seeing it clearly as the truth, as what needs to happen when he throws the first pitch to this batter next inning. Because of that blurry state, okay, now we're not able to separate. Okay, well, the intellect has to come through at some point. So when he goes out on the mound, that's where the second guessing of pitch calling, of location, of how he's throwing the ball, his grip, the pressure on the ball. All those things start to come into play because he was not able to process it in the dugout. Same goes for the hitter. And so when we're unable to move through those two states autonomously, we very much become victim to the game. Okay, now you ask, how do we practice that? Well, it's the practice of cadence, of falling into this flow state. For me, in my belief, it's the practice of, you could take, for instance, yoga. Okay, you perform a yoga practice. And at the end of yoga, everyone loves Savasana. Okay, now when you're in Shavasana, it's the practice of turning off, of switching states. Okay, well, the first time you ever try it, it's probably pretty difficult. Mind starts to race. I don't know, it's kind of hot in this room. I feel like this. What am I going to do afterwards? Okay. The more you do it, the more you practice switching on, off, the better you get at it. Okay, well, that is no different than moving from the emotion and body to intellect and mind. So it's through these practices, you call it yoga, call it meditation, breath work, somatic therapies, reading, writing, creation of any kind. It's through these holistic modalities that we practice moving from one state to the other. Now, in practicing them, they become more natural and we're able to fall into that flow state. Because as I use the wording, or the words intellect and mind, it almost should happen unconsciously as we move into competition. We become so skilled and so good at switching states back and forth that we don't need to think about switching states. It just happens because we've practiced it so often. You know, as a pitcher, you come in the dugout, okay, when one out happens, we're able to flip the switch, move into an intellectual state for whatever it is, an out and midway through the next batter, whatever it may be, and then we move back. And it's this repetition that we get better at and the cadence of it all that becomes organic to us, and then we're able to move into that flow state again and again. This is where pitching, hitting, playing any type of sport becomes an artistic endeavor. It's that flow, that pure flow. And as I think about the players that just got drafted, or the college players that are transferring schools, or the high school players that are moving into college, or even the college players that are returning to their own school, it's a new environment every time, right? You have new teammates, a new set, maybe a new coach, whatever it may be. Okay, so it becomes extremely vital for these individuals to have tools that allow them to move fluidly back and forth and be able to intertwine as well as separate emotion, body, intellect, mind. Because take for example, the player that is now moving from a from a mid-major school into a Power 5 school. Okay. Well, practice just got a lot more difficult because you are now playing at a higher skill level. The players at that school are going to be a higher skill level. Okay, well, now you're inherently going to deal with some imposter syndrome. You're going to deal with wanting to prove to everyone that you belong there. Okay. Well, if we're not able to have the tools that allow us to move back and forth and really create a rooted understanding of who we are and what we're trying to do and what we're good at, what makes us unique during competition, it's going to be very difficult to integrate into that environment, which makes it so important to practice these modalities and to have someone who you trust or someone that you pay to help move you through these modalities, because it is all about an investment in yourself, especially in the day that we're living in now where amateur players have the opportunity to get paid. Like, wouldn't you want to invest in yourself in that way? I mean, it's the same reason I invested and paid for yoga teacher training, or why I seek out different practitioners who can expose me to either modalities that I've already used, or modalities that I'm interested in, or ones that I've never even heard of. But if I trust the individual that is practicing, okay, I'm willing to try, and then I'm able to learn and practice moving in and out of these heightened states and move from emotion body to intellect mind. And that is a giant challenge that comes with taking on sports. It could be the same. It's the same thing for the workplace. It's the same thing for school. We have to have tools that allow us to switch back and forth, that we know we can do autonomously. And if we don't practice it, it just is not going to happen automatically. And as you practice it more, your roots of who you are grow deeper into the ground, and you become more sturdy. And so as you move from environment to environment, I mean, take it from me. I went to 3 different colleges: Oregon, Chipola, Alabama. I had to stay rooted in who I was each time. And I didn't have these modalities. And I'm able to look at my career now, my affiliate and, high-level college career, from an intellectual and mindful state. I'm not emotionally attached to what happened or what was. And so in doing so, I've come to the realization of, like, man, how valuable would it have been to pay someone who I truly trusted to allow me to help uncover the truest version of myself, so that I could be rooted and grounded as I moved from environment to environment. Because eventually I figured it out. And a lot of this work I've done on my own, which is what makes me unique. It's part of who I am, is the ability to figure things out, and the ability to adapt. Also the ability to communicate, which is through this podcast or whatever it may be. I continue to grow more skillful at communication, which is why I see it as part of my purpose, my soul's purpose, to help the next generation of athletes that are coming up, in order to integrate and in order to root themselves deeper in who they are, so that they can find success both on the field and off the field. And that will be done in the most authentic way possible. And it's only through the events that occurred this weekend where I was able to move from emotional to intellectual, back to emotional, back to intellectual. So, exactly what I laid out in terms of getting out, making a new plan. Okay, then I go up and I just enact the plan, trusting what I did, or trusting what I allowed my intellect and mind to come up with. And then I allowed my body to take over. Now we move back into the intellect and mind. And it's just that continual process. And the more that you practice it, the more fun that it becomes, because you allow yourself to fall into that flow state. And so for any young player, it could be young as in high school, college, professional, do you have someone that you trust enough to lead you through those modalities, or to help you practice those endeavors, whatever it may be, to allow you to root yourself in the understanding of yourself and be able to move back and forth between emotion, body, intellect, mind. And that brings us to the question that I'll finish today's episode with, which before I ask the question, this has come now full circle, in the sense that this is the most planning I've done for an episode. And I really started planning how I wanted to speak about things. I rehearsed it, and it's come out cleaner than ever before. And obviously you might say, well, no duh. Okay, well, it's the same process of moving it from intellect mind. I planned out what I wanted to talk about, how I wanted to portray it. Okay, well then now that the episode is taking place right here and we're nearing the end, maybe you realize it, I know I realize it, that as the words are flowing, it's just happening through the body. The mind is actually shut off. This is just coming from the body, soul, spirit. Okay, well, now afterwards, I'll review, think about what I really liked, what I could have done better, and we continue to move forward. And that's with any endeavor. And so the podcast itself is just, a microcosm of this act in which I discussed over the past, 25 minutes. Now, the question that we'll finish today's episode with is, what is something you are extremely skilled at that you take pride in? Doesn't even have to be for monetary value, but what is something that you are extremely skilled at that you take pride in? And that concludes this episode of A Thought Experiment.